Gotta make a thumbnail here real quick. So anyway, welcome back to the channel, everybody. Thank you to all the new subscribers and all the new commenters. Today we're going to be kind of discussing my experience with War and Peace. We'll kind of do like a little analysis of it, slash review, slash breakdown. I probably will not touch upon everything there is to know about War and Peace because it is rather complex. But I did write down the date that I started this. I started War and Peace on December 24th, Christmas Eve of 2022. And I finished it maybe about a week or two ago. So that's January, February, middle of March. So it took me a little under 3 months. So really not bad at all for this mammoth of a Tolstoy novel. Now, when we are approaching War and Peace, guys, it is very daunting initially. But once you kind of get going, you kind of get your your training wheels on, so to speak. You sort of start to immerse yourself in this world of Russia and the Napoleonic Wars and all the wonderful characters that exist in this universe. It's really quite a breeze. It does get a little bit tedious at times. It does get kind of repetitive, yeah. But it doesn't take away from the initial experience. So what are my thoughts on War and Peace? I don't really, believe in ratings, so to speak, but it's supposed to be one of the best novels ever written in the history of literature, right? And Tolstoy himself did not even consider this a novel. He considered it more of, obviously it was in the format of a novel, but he considered it more of sort of a, philosophical history novel, or way expanded beyond the average novel. And partly partly the reason for the length of War and Peace is that initially back then in the 1800s, 1700s, something like this would have been published serially in some type of catalog every so often, maybe once every 4 or 5 months, every 6 months. I'm not sure exactly how much would be in each section, but I guess at some point later on he did publish it as a full-scale novel, so we can kind of appreciate the length of something so obnoxiously long as War and Peace, as like getting a newsletter or getting the newspaper. You wouldn't necessarily notice that it's that long. You would just want to keep reading it and keep reading it. So I'm just going to open up to the little character section here just in case I forget any. But when we're talking about War and Peace, we've got a set of main characters, and then we've got peripheral characters, and then we've got semi-main characters and even background peripheral characters. We've got historical figures like Napoleon and a bunch of generals and military adjutants and all kinds of things. But basically all the people, the only people that you really need to know and that you'll get to know the best are people like, Andrei Bukovsky, Andrei Bukovsky. What's the other guy's name? There's a bunch of Bukovskys. Andrei Bukovsky, Nikolai Bukovsky. You got Princess Maria. You got Nikolai Bukovsky. You've got people like Pierre, who is of the Rostov family, I believe. You've got let me see here. Princess Anna, you've got Natasha, you've got those figures. So basically the main people that you need to know are pretty much Nikolai Bukovsky, Andrei Bukovsky, who is his son. Then you got Princess Maria, his daughter. And then you've got Count Ilya Rostov, Countess Natalia, Count Nikolai Rostov, Petya, who's like a little kid that kind of comes in the novel later. And then you got Prince Vasily, Prince Anatoly, Princess Anna, Denisov. Where's Pierre here? Am I missing him? Pierre. So Pierre is of the Bezukov family. So basically, in most translations or most versions of War and Peace, you'll get a little rundown, a little glossary of the families. And you have the Bezukovs, the Bolkonskys, the Rostovs, the Karugins, the Drubetskoys, and then you have other prominent characters, which are fairly substantial, but you will not really get to know them. You will not get to know the peripheral characters and the historical figures quite as well and as in depth as you will these first families. So there's basically a series of elite families, and there's, you know, maybe 5 or 6 members of each family, which is quite a bit, and you'll get to know most of them. But really, at the end of the day, Tolstoy really only explores maybe 2 or 3 individuals from each major family. So you're looking at maybe, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8, you know, maybe even technically 5 or 6 really important characters, and the rest are sort of peripheral characters. And when you're first reading this novel, it is a little bit hard to get the names straight, right? That's a little tricky at first. All the Russian names, sometimes they're addressed differently. But it's not quite as bad as Dostoevsky, I don't think. He was a little more Russian about it, a little more confusing about it, perhaps. But the reason there's so many characters, I think, is helps you to understand the important characters a little bit better, because you're seeing every single main character through several different eyes, several different viewpoints, right? So that helps you sort of get into the world of each and every character. And you'll sort of realize how they relate to one another, you know, why are they important to one another. And I do think Tolstoy did overdo it a little bit with all these characters, but at the same time, it's quite doable. It's quite approachable. War and Peace is not really that complex. I would say the most complex part about it is sort of deciphering to you as the reader, as the interpreter, as the connoisseur of the novel, who's important to you. What character do you relate to? What character do you like? Do you like the feminine female characters like Natasha and, you know, Helene and, you know, Princess Maria? Do you like the more girly characters like that? Or do you like the more masculine characters like Pierre and Andrei Bolkonsky and all those guys? And it's definitely a tour de force of their lives over the course of maybe 5 or 10 years, I think it takes place. So basically the novel starts out in 1805 in St. Petersburg, and kind of by the end of it we get to 1812, 1813. And I do think that towards the end of the novel, the characters just kind of fizzled out. Some of them died, some of them fizzled out, but I would have to kind of go back and reread it to kind of really understand what Tolstoy was doing, because I do think they kind of just fizzled out. The novel kind of ended on, let me see here, Pierre, and I would say the novel definitely ended on Pierre and Natasha. Those were kind of Tolstoy's favorite characters, I would say, yeah? Pierre and Natasha, those were kind of the ones that he ended on, and we sort of got the idea that Natasha was older now, and she had been through a lot, and Pierre had done the same. But at the same time, I feel like the character just kind of fizzled out. I don't even remember what happened to some of them. Some of them did die. Petya died in the war. You know, Nikolai Bolkonsky died early in the novel, who was Andrei's father, I believe. Now, we did have some other deaths here and there. And speaking about the deaths and some of the stuff that happens to the characters, I do think parts of it were a little bit corny, in the sense that the characters seem to always be getting bailed out at the last minute, you know, or just you would think they were going to die and then they would reappear or come back to life, which did make for a very entertaining reading. But I think he could have maybe, you know, killed off some of these characters, or maybe just finalized their story in one form or another, you know, way before, you know, over 1,000 pages. But what is the context of what Leo Tolstoy is trying to get across to us? When we read analyses or reviews of War and Peace, we often hear people talk about the fact that Tolstoy was challenging historians, and Tolstoy was, you know, sort of challenging the histories and the analysis of war, what it's actually like to be in war, who actually wins the wars, how are wars fought, what actually happens on the battlefield. So you'll get a lot of that. And if you're not into war history, this novel is probably not for you, because I would say at least, you know, I don't know, 45% of it, maybe 35% of it is geared towards the battlefield, but the rest of it is the peripheral, you know, humanity of what's going on during the time of war. And I would say Leo Tolstoy is definitely anti-war, but at the same time, there's a grandiosity, there's an epicness to Tolstoy's view of war, which to me did not 100% translate into an anti-war novel like we would have something like Johnny's Got His Gun by Dalton Trumbo or something like that. So it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit a product of its time, in the sense that, Leo Tolstoy was in some of the Napoleonic Wars, I believe, or some wars of that sort. And, so he was maybe trying to glorify some of it, right? He speaks about war with a lot of pride, with a lot of angst, with a lot of masculinity, with a lot of, epic grandiosity, like we said. And there are some scenes where, we have characters like Pierre, who gets captured by the Napoleonic French troops, and he goes through hell. But at the same time, Pierre is starving and he's being marched around in a prison gulag, and he gets locked up. And at the same time, he's kind of, that's one of his best character moments. He has a complete metamorphosis of his psyche, and he realizes that no matter what situation you're in, it's kind of what you make of it, right? I thought maybe Tolstoy could have gotten a little more into the nitty gritty of what it really would have been like to be a war prisoner. And there's scenes of, Russian troops, sort of sympathizing with the Napoleonic French troops and vice versa. And they're like kind of shooting the breeze, and they're not really trying to kill each other in some scenes. And you kind of get the sense from Tolstoy's experience that war is basically orchestrated by the higher up levels of the generals and the governments and stuff. But what we see on the battlefield is just sort of like this infestation of human insects that, either march or walk or run or shoot in one direction or another, basically to please the orders of their higher ups, and they're not necessarily even trying to hurt each other. He talks about how terrible it is that young men are put into these situations, and how they're forced to, face unimaginable cruelty. And I've got quite a bit of annotations in here, and we could kind of review those. Tolstoy breaks down his novel it starts out with a dinner party in St. Petersburg, like we said. And you sort of get introduced to the Vasilis and some of the Bolkovskis and all those guys, and Madame Yusof-Bourian and all those people. And then it kind of drifts into some of the battle stuff, and then you meet Princess Maria, then you meet Anatole. And then it kind of goes into Pierre, and Pierre joins the Freemasons, and we kind of learn about what his endeavors are as a character. He falls in love with several different women and has some turbulent affairs. It's kind of like a war novel latched onto a romantic soap opera, so to speak. There's a lot of romance. There's a lot of really good feminine as well as masculine introspection of all these different characters. What are their motivations? Now, I do think that Pierre could have been Pierre and Tolstoy, perhaps, what I'm trying to say is perhaps they were both Freemasons. Perhaps Pierre joining the Freemasons and the exploration of the Freemasonry in War and Peace is a reflection of Leo Tolstoy's experience or sort of peripheral knowledge of the Freemasons. Now, Tolstoy's view of the Freemasons is much more sort of spiritual, and it's not, necessarily geared towards, modern day conspiracies that we, have come to light about the Freemasons. This is more of just the 1800s Russian version of Freemasonry, I guess. And there are a lot of heavy esoteric topics and stuff like that have to do with the Freemasons. He has to learn a password, and he renounces God, and they're trying to get him to find his spirituality again. So anyway, then we kind of drift toward Andrei Bolkovsky, and he's a complex, interesting character. And sometimes you kind of lose track of which woman loves which guy and which character loves which woman. But there's really a lot here. And then you have Natasha, who is kind of torn between different worlds. She's torn between trying to appease her mother and her father. And then I think you've got Helene, or it's either Princess Maria or Helen, that her father is really mean to her and basically doesn't want her to ever leave the nest. And that's a very kind of a sad, part of the novel. So Sonia is in love with Nikolai Bolkovsky. So we obviously we have that. I'm kind of just doing a quick little rundown of what I remember. And then Nikolai Bulkovsky dies. I have it annotated here. Nikolai Bulkovsky dies, and Maria reflecting. So Maria was in love with, no, I think Maria was actually Nikolai's sister, I think. Could be wrong. You see what I mean? There's so many characters, you do get them kind of mixed up. And then interspersed in the novel amongst all the character and the action and the dialogue, you get sort of Tolstoy's philosophical thoughts on the war and of, you know, being a soldier or political stuff, you know, history itself, all that stuff. We get into introspection of, you know, really what War and Peace teaches you is how to write really profound, engaging, in-depth characters. He touches upon them once and then he goes back to them. He touches upon them again and then he comes back to them. And the novel just goes like this and that. And that way the characters, they will never really leave your psyche. These characters will be with you forever. But there's all kinds of wonderful scenes. Pierre is fighting, and they're like basically the you know, the French troops of Napoleon are basically sacking lots of different cities in Russia, and there's a little girl that was in a house fire, and Pierre kind of jumps in and saves the little girl, and he describes how feral and how freakish she kind of was, but he saved her anyway. So these characters are just some of the best characters I've ever met in literature. Having said that, I think there is quite a few of them, maybe a little too many, and sometimes you kind of get their lives mixed up a little bit, right? Because there's just so much going on. But in terms of, you know, what Tolstoy was trying to do, he was basically trying to, I don't want to say rewrite, but he's basically offering a fresh perspective of history of the Napoleonic Wars in the context of a novel with really great romantic, epic, grandiose characters. But also, in addition to that, you sort of have his sort of philosophical and political, you know, statements that he makes in here. You can definitely see where people like Robert Greene, with the 48 Laws of Power and Laws of Human Nature, got some of his ideas from War and Peace. Just the vast, hyper-analytical, you know, introspection. You know, we could even draw some parallels to somebody like Thomas Wolfe, perhaps was inspired by Tolstoy. And I'm not a huge fan of like war novels and stuff, right? But it's definitely intriguing. It definitely makes me want to read more, not only war novels, but also Russian literature in general. We do have some contenders for what we're going to pick up next in the next couple of months. It might be Anna Karenina, but I do want to get some Dostoevsky in there as well. So we'll probably start Crime and Punishment, or perhaps Notes from the Underground or something. So as you can see, you know, Tolstoy is very demanding. He demands that you invest yourself in these characters. He demands that you invest yourself into the Napoleonic Wars. He demands that you, you know, are retrospective and sympathetic with these characters, as well as the victims of war, the victors of war, as well as the victims. And he demands that you, you know, go on this tour de force with him and with all these wonderful characters. Which characters stood out to me the most? I would definitely say Pierre. There was something about him that I just kind of related to. He liked to drink, and he had some problems with women, and he, you know, got his heart broken, and he was always kind of on the fence about how he felt. And it's just such a human novel, because you don't get a perfect, you know, introspection. You don't get a perfect performance out of these characters. They're flawed. They fumble. They're clumsy. You know, both physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and you get the full gambit of what it's like to basically be a human and experience life. And I really like Natasha. I do like Prince Andrei. He's quite compelling. I like Helen and Princess Maria. Some of the younger female characters, they're just so cute and adorable, and you can kind of relate to them in some ways. And Tolstoy just has a beautiful way of just sort of getting you into this story. So if you're a fan of Russian literature or romance or war history or just, you know, classics in general, you definitely need to get War and Peace under your belt. And I finished it in about 3 months, guys. About 2.5 months, actually. So I know it can be done. There's no excuse why you're not reading War and Peace. It is very daunting. And I don't remember, you know, really, I must have blown through it pretty quick. You know, the chapters are really short, which really helps the story kind of to move along. You know, they're not real long chapters like you would get out of Thomas Wolfe or somebody like that. So definitely a beautiful epic novel. We're definitely going to be doing a rereading at some point. Perhaps maybe next Christmas I might pick this up again, or maybe before, maybe a little bit later, but I do want to contextualize this a little bit more and master some of the characters. It's very hard to master any character or any relationship in literature without doing a rereading, right? That's why we're doing a second rereading of Hamlet. That's why we've read, Edward II by Christopher Marlowe twice. We're going to be doing some rereadings here pretty soon. But I think we will kind of close out this video, guys. Let me know if you guys have read War and Peace. Let me know if you guys have read Anna Karenina. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Leo Tolstoy novel is. And thank you so much for watching this, guys. Is there anything else I wanted to touch upon? I can't really think of anything. A lot of characters. A lot of dialogue, a lot of action scenes, a lot of romance, a lot of war, and a lot of philosophical history related to war and cool stuff like that. So perhaps we'll do more of a, after a rereading, maybe we'll do like a full, hour's worth analysis. This is more of just a review, just to kind of refresh my thoughts and let you guys know that I did finish this. So make sure you guys follow me on Instagram at Andrew Marlowe Artist Official. Send me an email at andrewmarlowe22@gmail.com, and we will talk to you guys very soon.